The latest news and talk, hot, fresh, and delivered when you want it. Power 98.7. Now we're talking.
11 minutes before 8 on the Power Business this Monday evening. Let's take a closer look now at South Africa's visa application system following a recent court ruling ordering the Department of Home Affairs to issue a critical skills visa to a US accounting professional after several years of delay. And since over the last few years, we've seen efforts that have been made to address backlogs, but concerns still remain around rejections, appeals and administrative processes by the Department of Home Affairs. Let's speak now to MoneyWeb journalist Kieran Ryan, who's been tracking the story over the last several months. Thanks very much for joining us, Kieran. This is one individual and this is one particular court case, but what does it reveal more broadly about the way that the visa administration is currently being rolled out?
Yeah, it's an interesting reflection on what is happening in Home Affairs, because what we've seen is people who've got the money can actually afford to take the Department of Home Affairs to court to actually force them basically to process their visa applications. So this was a professional from the UK. He's a professional accountant. He's a member of the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants, apart from being a member of the equivalent body in the UK. And he waited 2 years for his visa to be processed, and it just was illogical. And usually the court would say they would force the Department of Home Affairs to process these applications, but in this case they said issue the visa, not just process, because if you say process, then it still leaves them a bit of discretion to refuse. And it's not just one case like this. There are many. I spoke to quite a few immigration lawyers who told me that this was a couple of months ago, that up to 7, 8 out of 10 of their clients who should qualify were being rejected. So we've had this visa backlog that was last year about 300,000 visas, and that was cleared apparently in about 6 or 7 months by the new Minister of Home Affairs, Leon Schreiber. But what appears to have happened is a little bit of fudging of figures there, because the rejection rate also went up, and that's what I'm hearing from these immigration lawyers.
Let's talk about how you first came across this story with this particular individual, this accounting professional who's accredited to SAICA.
Okay, so he was a client of an immigration firm here in South Africa called Expat Web, and this was an area that I've been covering for quite a while. I've been looking at the whole issue of the ZEP, the Zimbabwe Exemption Permits, for quite some years, and how that's been treated by Home Affairs under the previous minister, Aaron Motsoaledi. And the ZEP status for Zimbabweans who are working here, that was introduced basically because there was a refugee problem, if you can call it that. The Zimbabweans were fleeing across the border. There was no economic opportunities in Zimbabwe, so they came here. And, relations were pretty good, so the South African government issued them this permit, which allowed them to live and work here. Now, all of a sudden, Aaron Motsoaledi revoked that. It has been to court. It has been extended a few times. But I think what that did was it exposed a lot of other issues that were happening in Home Affairs, where visas from people who are professionals. Bear in mind that there is a thing called the critical skills list. So Home Affairs will consider your visa to work here based on whether you satisfy the requirements on this critical skills list, and that you can be an engineer, you can be an accountant, various other professions are very much in need. So if you satisfy that critical skills list, then you should get the visa. But still, they're being rejected, and sometimes on very flimsy grounds. Like in this particular case, the UK professional didn't have a letter from a professional body, even though he was clearly, you could go on the internet and you could see that he was a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants. And I know another case of a German person a wealthy German person who came to South Africa. He was waiting 3 years to get his visa. He spent 300,000 Rand taking Department of Home Affairs to court just to get them to process his visa, which he eventually got, and he got permanent residence. Remember that the country is trying to attract people with money who will invest here, start up businesses, buy property, and that sort of thing. And yet you're getting this very kind of cavalier attitude coming from the Department of Home Affairs, where they are just rejecting visas for no good reasons.
Of course, and we'll get the Department of Home Affairs on tomorrow on the Power Business, or in the next coming days, just to hear their side of the story. And then this, of course, creates, as you mentioned, a particular issue around access to critical skills visas, because it's only people who have the money to be able to take the department to court who are then able to go ahead and receive this visa.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, if you're having Home Affairs on tomorrow, one of the things you can ask them about is the corruption in the office, because people who don't have those means are still being forced to pay thousands and thousands of rands. You know, if you're coming from Zimbabwe or Malawi, Mozambique, and you're looking for a work visa here in South Africa, these things have been issued to people who can afford to bribe their way through the process. And this is obviously something Leon Schreiber has spoken about. He's tightened up controls along the border and that type of thing. But even just recently, here in Joburg, going to the Home Affairs Department, you can jump the queue if you pay a few $1,000. Not that that's going to necessarily get you a visa which you're not entitled to, but it will certainly speed up the process. So there's, my feeling is that Home Affairs is a multi-billion rand laundering machine. There's all sorts of ways of making money out of visas. For example, if you're coming from Malawi, and I'm told this from a number of people that I don't know if that's still true today, but up until quite recently it was. Even if you didn't have a passport, you could enter South Africa, and there's almost like a menu of options when you get to the border. You don't even leave the bus. You got no passport, you pay a certain amount. You don't have a visa, you pay a certain amount. Even if you've got all the paperwork in order, you still pay a certain amount. Whether that's still going on, it's very hard to determine. But remember that there was, not so long ago, late last year, they found that there was a parallel border crossing just next to Bike Bridge, where people were collecting money from people crossing from Zimbabwe. And that had nothing to do with Home Affairs. That was shut down, of course.
Yeah, and I mean, we've spoken a lot on the station about the porous borders, and we'll have to go into that in greater detail with Home Affairs and with other migration experts. Looking at the critical skills visa now, it's also seen as very important as an ease of doing business, or an ease of business, of investing in this country. Where do you see the major bottlenecks happening?
I think the bottlenecks are within the Department of Home Affairs itself, where the amount of documentation that you have to supply for a critical skills visa is quite enormous. There's a few cases I reported on some months ago where people were rejected on the grounds of, for example, the wife of a person who's a multimillionaire trying to come into South Africa, asking for silly things like, their marriage certificates, sometimes even a DNA test, because the husband was already in the country, or the child was already in the country, sorry. These type of things are just slowing the process enormously. It could be a lot smoother. And I know Leon Schreiber, his heart's in the right place. He's doing the best that he can, but I think he's got a lot more work to do to get this under control.
It's almost a year since Leon Schreiber became Minister of Home Affairs. He made a number of announcements, one that you spoke of, around clearing that 300,000 backlog. What other kinds of shifts or changes have you seen in the department with your close reporting on this?
Well, one of the very good things he's done is he's automated this to a large extent. You now can do a lot of your applications online. You can pay online. You can book. You can reserve an appointment at Home Affairs or even through the banks online. So he's really using technology to very good effect. I've used it because I'm trying to renew my passport. It's not where it should be. It's still, you've got to log in 3 or 4 times to get this thing to work. So, they could do a bit more smoothing and polishing around that. But they're heading in the right direction, I think, with this whole e-application process.
Right. The issue is that South African citizens have a number of options for digital, but as people applying from overseas, it's still very paper-based, requiring posting the documents physically as well.
Yes, and there was another case that was heard in the Western Cape High Court, I think it was in March, where they have these people that are kind of patrolling the Home Affairs floor. So when you go in there, you're queuing up at Home Affairs, and they would have these people, they were called gatekeepers. Basically, they would look at your papers, and they would do a very cursory examination of the papers and say, no, your papers are not in order, you've got to go away and supply something else. You know, it might be that you need your marriage certificate, but it was found by the court that this was actually unlawful, what they were doing. You cannot have these floor people, these officials or functionaries of Home Affairs, just basically turning you down and kicking you out because they think, in their opinion, that you don't have the right paperwork. And this is all the more reason to get this whole process automated and improved and bring it online and make it very clear to people what documentation it is that they need.
Right. Thanks very much, Kieran Ryan, a journalist at MoneyWeb, who's been closely tracking the immigration system and taking us through the story that Home Affairs has been given 30 days to issue a skills visa to a UK accounting professional. He's been in that process for a number of years. And Kieran just pointing out the divide between people who are able to afford the significant costs of taking Home Affairs to court to get their visa to get their visa ball rolling, and those people who do not have the funds.
Power Business was proudly brought to you by MTN. Today, we make moves.